Hello again, Steve here with a few comments on Donald Trump's State of the Union address. I spent a couple of hours going through the video and going through the speech and putting cut videos. I was 70 different cut videos as I had this idea that maybe I'd do a video where the thing was playing and then while everybody was clapping I'd have some commentary. But I realized this was going to just take an overwhelming amount of time and I don't have the time or the know-how to actually how to do that. So I'm just going to go basically through my notes, and that'll be basically along the lines of the video, and hopefully there's some value there. So it starts out, my first observation was, here's Paul Ryan right sitting behind this guy. And I'll put a link in the description down below of Paul Ryan basically saying, before the election, before Trump was winning, he's saying that I'm not going to support Donald Trump, not now, not in the future. Then he goes on to say how he was having this congressional GOP event that he disinvited Donald Trump to, and that he's not going to help him. He's not going to campaign at all. And you can see it in the guy's face. Compare his face when you watch the video. Paul Ryan's face sitting right behind Donald Trump compared to Mike Pence. Paul Ryan's face is a face of contempt. I mean, he's one of these never Trumpers, even if he wasn't officially, I'm not even sure, but he specifically says that he's not going to support Donald Trump. So he's having to eat crow, but he's a man of not very many principles, I guess, and I don't know, I can't really say much about him, but I do have some comments about him further on as we go along here. Basically what I saw Donald Trump do over and over and over again throughout the speech, but let me take a little back up for a minute. This speech is not only an incredibly powerful speech, I think, for many people, in many reasons, but also in terms of people who do public speaking. If they watch how this speech was constructed in terms of a persuasion speech, it is absolutely powerful because there's this constant flipping between emotion and reason, emotion and reason, to build up to his case. And of course, it's typical Trump. It's branding, right? He has these key points, the main one being Make America Great Again, and it's all about that. The other thing that's lost on a lot of people, especially the left, is that Donald Trump is an amazingly progressive kind of guy. His foundational education in his early years was the positive power, the power of positive thinking. Norman Vincent Peale, the great Dutch Reform minister, who basically, from my understanding, was one of the early originators, you might say, of the what you'd call prosperity theology. What his name, Robert Schuller, went on, the Crystal Cathedral and so on. Those were prosperity. You might say Joel Osteen, maybe too. I'm not sure. But anyway, this is Donald Trump's. Aside from his social libertinism, as he was sort of celebrated for when he was loved back in the day when he was buddies with the Clintons and Oprah and all those hobnobbers, right? He was quite a well-liked guy. But of course, he became this big threat because he upset the apple cart in the halls of power. And an interesting thing that this Paul Ryan says is that he says, I'm not going to bother with Donald Trump. I'm paraphrasing, but you can listen to that video that I posted, that I linked to there. I'm going to go to work for the GOP. That's what he says. I work for the GOP. He specifically says something like along that lines, the Republican Party or whatever. Meanwhile, so that's in great contrast because Donald Trump was out there day after day after day campaigning saying, I'm working for you guys, I'm working for the people. But Paul Ryan explicitly says that he's not working for the people, and doesn't say that anyways, I'm working for the Republican Party, right? So in other words, he might as well be saying that he's got his snout in the trough, he's going to keep his snout in the trough, and that's who he's going to work for, is for those who got their snout in the trough. And therefore, of course, naturally, Donald Trump is a big threat to him. So he's not going to win these guys over, and he's not going to win over the mainstream Republicans. He's not going to win over, for sure, mainstream Democrats if he just appeals to reason. He can't do that. He has to appeal to as broad a base as he can, emotionally and logically. So he's got to appeal, first of all, with logic, and then he's got to appeal with the reason of this is the results. So lots of people in the Rust Belt who weren't Democrats before, they're getting more money in their pocket because they're getting pay raises and they're getting tax cuts, and it's pretty hard to just send that back to the government. I mean, if the Democrats had got in, Hillary Clinton in, they wouldn't have got the tax cuts, they wouldn't have got the raises, they would have got probably more layoffs because that's the Wall Street way, right? So he builds an appeal. He uses word imagery, lots of word imagery. And I don't know if he wrote this speech, but I suspect he had a great deal of input into what the content of it, how it's going to go, because he's a masterful crafter of imagery, right? I mean, he's a businessman. Obviously, he's probably the best there is there, and probably the most practical genius that politics has seen in America in, who knows, maybe forever. I don't know. And certainly, certainly he was the first free enterprise guy. Everybody else has been government. Every one of the presidents has been government except for Donald Trump, which tells us something, right? Okay, but he says things like, "We've shared the heights of victory and the pains of hardship, floods, fire, storm, the beauty of the American soul and the steel of the American spine." You see that? It's almost poetic, the way this is built. I don't suspect he wrote that, but I suspect this is the general, what he wanted to say, right? And he keeps on saying over and over again, like these things, this American heart and this American spine, it reminds us of who we are and who we can be, you know? And he's always talking about we. There's no divide here. There's no divide, not like the Democrats where there was all these pigeonholes. There's the blacks and the whites and the women and the this and that and the haves and the have-nots and all the 1% and all that, right? It was we're all in this together, and that actually builds camaraderie, that builds the spirit of nationhood in a way, right? And lots of hero worship, which is once again a hallmark of team, right? People can gather around heroes, and he does it masterfully. He's done this over and over again, but did it really well here. For almost all the categories he talked about, all the areas he talked about, he brought in a hero. Right, he brought in a woman hero, petty officer, who would save so many people out of a helicopter or whatever, and he gave the time to her, lots of time for people to clap and her to stand and look around. They looked very uncomfortable. Same with the firefighter that went on, you know, and and you notice too this Paul Ryan guy, this wolf in sheep's clothes, even he, see, that's the power of emotion. It's hard for him to resist, to stay in his never Trump mode, when the shining light of heroism is gone on to somebody like that Ashley, that woman, who, you know, and even he begins to clap and begins to smile. It's really quite powerful to see that. He brings in children, of course, how this David, this firefighter, had saved children. It's pretty hard to go wrong with bringing children in and saving children. Who doesn't want to save the children, right? That's another emotional appeal. And he appeals to politicians, because many people hate politicians. So once again, he's picking out the different areas that he could possibly appeal to. This guy who is a politician, who, in Donald Trump's words, he took a bullet for us, kind of thing, right? Like, oh yeah, he's one of the team, but he's a politician and he took a bullet for us. It sounds pretty good. So once again, the hated politician, the hated cops, all these different hated groups by many of the baited people in society. He gives examples of reasons to worship these people as I'm not saying that I agree with it or whatever, but whatever it was. Anyways, and through all this, he has a call for unity. I find it really interesting to watch these characters on the Democrat side, the Schumers and the Feinsteins and the Black Caucus, who were just, I mean, even when Donald Trump goes on to talk about examples of how there's success, they're not clapping. And actually, I think it was Feinstein ahead of time. It looks like she was talking to all the people to make sure they're all on track. They're not gonna give any support. They'll eat the donuts and drink the coffee, but not give any support to what's going on, you know. And he talked about that we are a nation who can climb mountains and whatnot. There's all this positive stuff, and then he goes into statistics. The statistics of how I had those written down, but I forget what they were. There was something like along the lines of millions of jobs, millions of, let me see, I had it written down here. Here we go. What do you say here? Statistics. Millions of jobs, 200,000 manufacturing jobs, rising in wages, unemployment claims being way down, the African American unemployment rate the lowest in history, and the Black Caucus, the divided caucus. They all had special ties and weird bling bling on to look like Africans or something like that, but they just sit aside. No smiles, no anything. When the blacks are winning in America, you can see they don't give a fuck about blacks, about their own people. They're there for the trough, and they're the swamp, And they're eating well. They're all fat, by the way, and probably on lots of pharmaceuticals as well. The Hispanic unemployment, the lowest in history. Once again, they cut to a Hispanic, I guess, congressperson or whatever, not standing, not clapping, nothing, right? Small business confidence, all times high. Stock market, high records. $8 trillion of increase, almost as much as Obama's disaster of $10 trillion in the whole, more than all presidents combined. Isn't that interesting? And he makes the claim that, and this is once again benefits of the retirees, an appeal to the seniors, the big block, that their retirement savings plans are more secure if the stock market's up. And the promise that he made from that same podium a year before, that there would be tax cuts. He makes the point that they did have drastic tax cut and regulation slashing, and this means already people see lowering taxes, more money in their pocket. And later on, he brings in a black worker who's very successful, who's getting more money in his pocket, and he's investing it in his daughter's future and so on. All amazing, positive stuff, very progressive, right? A lot of times, the regressive people, the Democrats, are sometimes called progressive, but this is what the real progress is taking place, power of positive thinking, not negative thinking. And he used the example of Apple and different companies. And nobody's going to think for a minute that Apple, this Silicon Valley giant, is anything in favor of Donald Trump. I mean, these are the kind of guys who are plotting against him, basically. They respond to incentive. They drop the corporate tax from 35 to 21% or whatever. They can actually compete then. And of course, for the longest time, the Democrats were saying it's these evil corporations, they're bringing their jobs out, they're firing people and everything. No, it's because you guys are regulating them out of business. That's why they can't be there. And these are lots of examples. And he talked about how all these companies were moving to the Mexico and whatever. And now here's an example of one company that's actually closing in Mexico and moving to somewhere in Detroit or in Michigan. And what he was talking about, he has examples of these things happen. And there was lots of appeal to unity and a lot of appeal to greatness. There's an appeal to the middle class, right? Because this is what the socialists and the authoritarians want. They want everybody to be basically equally pathetic in this large hodgepodge. And of course, you always got to have a Stalin in charge. I mean, he doesn't live like the paupers. All these Feinsteins and Schumers and stuff, of course, they want to live in opulence. So they don't care about the middle class, gutting of the middle class, but lowering of the taxes. And this is the other thing, too, is what these Democrats and all these people were saying was that this tax reform was just going to help guys like Donald Trump, right? He was just there for himself. But no, here's the examples coming out over and over and over again that this is the basic tax bracket is raised right from the very bottom to double $24,000 to make tax free. That's unbelievable compared to most people. And actually, that's beneficial to places like Canada. And places like Ontario that Kathleen Wynne and these Trudeau characters, they should be shivering in their boots because you know what? It's a competitive market out there. And as I said before, the Trump win didn't mean people coming up to Canada. It was going to be people from Canada going down there because that's where the opportunity is going to be, because that's when business is treated well, it'll go there. And that's what's happening is business is going to be treated better there. So people are going to go there. So the great socialist Donald Trump, he's going to manage the socialism better and just take a little bit less off the productive, and it's going to work better because he knows as a more efficient socialist that if you give people more of their earnings, they'll actually be more energetic and produce more. So you can actually get more tax revenue if you allow the sheeple to keep more of what they work for. And he also appeals to faith and family. And this is to bring on board the Bible type people and the people who want to have families and whatnot. He appeals to them, and he mentions them a few times. And it's interesting to watch the Democrat side. Once in a while, they would clap because that means there's certain things that they would almost forget. Like they're on a lot. Like I think this Feinstein, she's probably on a lot of pharmaceuticals. She looks about half zonked most of the time. So every once in a while, it looks like she wakes up and starts clapping. And but that's emotion breaking through this, I think. He appeals to the military and the military-industrial complex, of course, because he's also a big government guy and wants to have lots of dicks to wag around the world. Because, of course, even though he talks about at times that he's the president for the United States, he's still got to look after the hegemony of the empire, right? For sure. And Yeah, there's also the appeal to the kid and the civics, the importance of civics, where this kid apparently set up this campaign to put a whole bunch of flags by the veterans, right? And of course, anytime you have that in the States, people who are patriotic, anyways, I mean, their national anthem has bombs in the air. After all, they are pretty much of a warring country. So anytime you can honor the dead, fallen, you're going to be in their good books as well. He appeals to the Constitution through the justice system and having a bunch of the chief judges or whatever sitting up front, and he's appointing conservative judges who are going to recognize the Constitution and therefore probably not have as many dream acts and so on that are illegally unconstitutional go through and cause all kinds of mayhem in the future. And he appeals to religious freedom, which was under fire, which is important for a lot of people. He appeals to the veterans' families. You see how many people he's appealing to and how disastrous the veteran hospitals are, so they got more choice now. This is also an appeal to freedom. I'm going to peel back the government tyranny upon your lives. You can actually make some choices for now. Firing underperforming government staffers. This is a great one, right? Because I forget what it does. So he's talking about empowering those who do perform and letting go of those who don't, getting rid of the deadwood and removing regulations. And I forget what he was talking about, but he has a way of putting it forth that we're going to take care of our veterans. Our veterans were being taken care of very, very poorly. So people like that. So once again, he jumps the emotion up, and then he says, well, how we had to do that was we had to get rid of some deadwood, and get some people in there who knew what they were doing. So that's, it's kind of like, we take some, we lose some. It's the art of the deal, as his people who claim to know a lot about Donald Trump never read the book probably. But if you read it, you understand Donald Trump. It's negotiation. It's all negotiations. And removing regulations. I like this line here. We're going to end the war on energy and on clean coal. And this appeals to the people who want to end wars, right? I mean, America has all kinds of wars. They got drug wars going on. They got wars on terrorism. They got wars on poverty. They got all these wars going on. So he flipped that around and says, we got a war on energy, right? And of course, this also helps. So it gets people saying, well, you want to end wars, don't you? And I thought that was a good line. And of course, it also helps those who want to go back to work. Those who are the coal miners in West Virginia, whatever, oil people up near ANWR in Alaska and whatever. It's all these people who want to go back to work too. Motor City, great city at one time, in decline and terrible disaster. He makes the point that we're going to try to work on that by bringing business back. Great news inspires great results. He appeals to seniors through the drug situation with the high price. But once again, this is an example of his socialist tendencies, which is that the prices of drugs are high, so we're going to make sure they come down. They're going to put price controls of some sort on them, right? He appeals to the House Democrats. So sometimes he appeals to even the Bernie Sanders. At one time, Bernie Sanders actually started clapping. I forget what it was for, but it's too bad I couldn't have put all these videos in here. I would know. Appeal to the Rust Belt. He returns to the first State of the Union address he had, which was big socialism, which is what we're going to build roads, we're going to build highways, tunnels, walls, airports, and all this sort of stuff to get people working again. And most people, of course, to do those kind of jobs don't give a shit where the money comes from. They just want work, right? And of course, if you... so he has this good line, welfare to work, dependence to independence, and poverty to prosperity. And that's where Bernie Sanders started clapping, which, of course, Bernie Sanders, as a good socialist, he also wants prosperity to turn into prosperity as well. Poverty to turn into prosperity. Just how he does it is going to be different, because he's just going to take money from he's got the class warfare going on. Those guys have too much money, we'll give it to you, and it'll be kumbaya. Donald Trump's approach is, let's just encourage people to be productive, leave them alone for the most part, encourage them, and leave them have what they have, and take care of those who really can't take care of themselves. But if those who can work, let them work. Don't just cut out their jobs and then put them on welfare. So he's a better manager of socialism at the end of the day, I would say. Paid family leave. That sounds like Canada all of a sudden, but he's appealing to the working mothers and so on, right? Strong borders. He appeals to the disaster. He appeals to the people who are really concerned about the disaster of unfettered migration with things like lotteries and stuff. There's a fucking immigration lottery. I actually filled out that one time, and Canada wasn't on the list apparently that year. They're not on anymore, actually. I believe they were all just third world countries for the most part. and for illegal immigration. So he's appealing to those people a lot too. Didn't talk much about the wall. I was surprised, but he did talk a little bit about just getting control of things. Um, he has this good line that Americans are dreamers too, right? So and he makes the point that um, please don't misunderstand me. I'm talking about I'm the U.S. president here, and he's talking about that. Like we can't take care of everybody in the world. We got to take care of this, and that's an appeal to people. But specifically, he used the example. He brought out another hero, which is a Hispanic patriot who deals with rounding up these rogue gangs that have been let in under this so-called Dream Act, right? And who killed. And then he brought up a family too who had their daughters killed by some illegal alien gang, and that crying and so on, that black woman crying. Even the Democrats, it's hard for them to resist that. It's very, very powerful. And he talked about the opioid crisis and the will to succeed, the will to prevail. Lots of this wording, right? Examples of the hero. Oh yeah, he had this he likes to bring up cops, and this cop from somewhere down in New Mexico or whatever, and had this story of this woman who just, because he was talking about the opioid crisis, and this woman was about to inject heroin, but she was pregnant. He talked to her, and God talked to her. God talked to the cop to do something about it, and so he said he would, and they ended by adopting the baby, and the baby was there, right? And this was not only, it was a couple of things. It was an appeal to the hero of the cop. It was an appeal to we can do something about the opioid thing. And it was also, I think, it was a stab in the back of Planned Parenthood, who would have encouraged that woman to just kill the baby. And meanwhile, the real baby, was there with this loving-looking mother. So with the adopted mother, it was quite an amazing thing. How many? And of course, he eventually had to go on to the dick wagging thing of we got to have a strong military, and he didn't bother getting into it. It was Hillary that caused a lot of this mess, and Barack Obama and so on. But he he talked about ISIS and how the ISIS has been on the run, and that was one of his things in his campaign, that we're going to get rid of ISIS, and they pretty much succeeded. But he didn't bother mentioning that it was Hillary and Obama and those guys that funded ISIS and got it going in the first place, and basically their weapons have come from the Americans. But there was hero worshiping in there as well. He brought out a soldier who had saved his buddy and in the war and whatever. It was a lot of this sort of stuff, right? And he talked about how he identified ISIS as terrorists and so on. And I made the point that, well, they could be called freedom fighters who are funded and fueled and everything by U.S. taxpayers. That's another way of looking at it. So he talked about making sure we have Guantanamo Bay opened up. Well, why not, right? If you're going to be in the business of fighting international terrorists, the last thing you want to do is involve the U.S. Constitution, where people would have rights. So you want to make sure you put it in some places outside of your hegemony, put it inside of a communist country called Cuba, and therefore you don't have to worry about following any rules. You can treat them however you want. He had an appeal to sovereignty to do with the UN, with their decision to put, and that was appealing to probably to people who, don't like the UN. Say, fuck off, UN. This is America. We're going to do what we want. He had he talked about Iran and its struggle for freedom. This was interesting because Iran had a struggle for freedom not long ago during the Obama administration, and Obama deliberately stayed out of it. In fact, he curtailed the CIA, I believe it was, from getting involved in gathering information because Obama had a track record of letting these groups like these Islamic Brotherhood or Muslim Brotherhood or whatever to take over through the instigation of the Arab Spring and whatever, and Libya and all these, and he seemed to want the terrorists who are the thugs who are running Iran to keep running it, and also too, I mean, Trump doesn't seem to like countries that are outside the hegemony. He pointed out Russia, China, North Korea, Venezuela, and Cuba. Several of those are under the Monroe Doctrine, so they're violating the Monroe Doctrine. But even the others, Russia and China, he can't touch, right? But he can sort of meddle around with Iran, and he certainly can meddle around with Kim Jong-un because they're pretty small. And he's able to make deals because the Chinese are deal makers, so he's able to make a deal with China to calm the North Koreans down. But there was a bit of talk about that, and I had a kind of a thought at the time too, because earlier on he talked about it, something along the lines, but please don't misunderstand me. I'm president of the United States. I can take care of the United States. So my thinking at this point was, what the hell are you doing talking about the rest of the world? Well, the truth of the matter is, it's an empire, and it spans the rest of the world. So he has to talk about it, and they have bases all over the world, and they have a hegemonic claim, basically, certainly to the Americas and a lot of the rest of the world, to somehow police it. And in his talk about North Korea, once again, appeal to emotion, appeal to hero worship, he brought out this guy Sung Ho, who is a guy who escaped from North Korea, and he went on crutches all the way to South Korea through Southeast Asia. It was an amazing, amazing story, but it is so along the lines of the power of positive thinking. I mean, and furthermore, too, the positive power of thinking is very, very strong in South Korea because they were Christianized by the Americans. The American Protestant ethic is, basically the power of positive thinking, that you got God on your side, you can do pretty much anything. And it's no surprise, too, that the largest crystal cathedral in the world is in South Korea. I believe it's Seoul. Somehow related to, Robert Schuller's work in Garden Grove, California, and he was a student of Norman Vincent Peale. So the connection comes around to this Sung Ho, this North Korean guy who now helps out, he became a Christian, I guess, and so on, right? It's a very interesting story. It's worth watching, I think. There's a lot of value in here in terms of personal growth, just to watch this guy in action. It's absolutely amazing. He has an appeal to freedom, and this is one of the reasons I would, of course, favor Trump over pretty much anybody else, even though I don't vote or anything. I can disagree with much of what he has. I don't like the idea that he lobs a few bombs into Syria to Dick Wag when the Chinese premier or whatever was coming over. But I have to say God bless America, because, America is the greatest example of the emancipation of humanity in the world, and that the world has ever seen. And therefore it has the most corruption too, because whenever you have a lot of freedom breakout, you have a lot of prosperity breakout. When you have a lot of prosperity breakout, all the dirtbags, like the lawyers and the bar association and all those sorts of people, start to creep back in. The people who the adept freeloaders and the criminals, and they form rackets, corporations like the Democratic Party, and who will just try to milk it off, and so the greatest freedom, if unchecked, will create the greatest tyranny, and that's what we see. But I say God bless America, because I think the world has benefited to the positive side. Of course, a lot of negative side as well, but to the positive side. And Donald Trump is the kind of a signature of that, because he comes right out of that Christian prosperity theology, which is a fantastic philosophy in a way to have, I think. And he talks about how this all belongs to the people. We're here to work for the people. This building belongs to the people. And of course, the guy sitting right behind him, he's working for the Republican Party, not for the people. But Donald Trump, he's saying that I work for the people, essentially. And to me, after a speech like that, anybody who's got any moral strings in them, whatever, who's actually listened to that, who can't at least feel a little bit relieved that a guy like that, a guy that skilled and that practically genius, who actually seems to care, is actually doing something there. And of course, no speech in the world that Donald Trump should do should be left without some branding right at the end, because Donald Trump's the masterful brander. He keeps on plugging his main cause, right? Make America great again. And he ends it off with making America again, making America great again. All of us are making America great again. But then the funny thing of it is I thought it was over, because people were clapping and stuff like that, and then he starts up again, and he goes for a little bit longer. I forget what he finally said, but it was something that he wanted to add in by the look of it, because he's famous for that. Like he'll go off script for a while. I think it was scripted, but the off script was some sort of a negotiation that was going on by whoever was writing it. He read it and he said, "Oh, you should add this at the end," but it was already completed with "Make America Great Again." But then he wanted to carry on, and he did for a little bit. But that was fine. So yeah, overall, I think it could go down in history as one of the most, not the most eloquently spoken speech, but in terms of the content and the strategy of it and how it was built, against all odds kind of guy. It was really quite an amazing speech. Steve, you're again, great chatting. Talk again soon. Bye for now.